Hi, and welcome to True Crime, a channel dedicated to the dark underworld of criminal activity carried out by gangsters, mobsters, cartel leaders, and others. In today's video, we delve into the shadowy world of Mexican drug cartels and their methods for smuggling guns from the United States. As one of the most violent and powerful criminal organizations in the world, these cartels rely heavily on firearms to maintain their operations and intimidate their rivals. But how do they get their hands on these weapons, and what measures are being taken to prevent them from doing so? Join us as we explore the complex and often a deadly network of arms trafficking that enables Mexican drug cartels to acquire weapons from the U.S. From border crossings to black markets, we examine the various tactics used to smuggle guns across the border and into the hands of dangerous criminals. Let's get started. Guns origins. The United States government has been collaborating with Mexican authorities to combat the illegal trafficking of firearms into Mexico. With the help of a TF, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection, Mexico has received technology, equipment, and training to fight against organized crime and drug cartels. One of the cornerstones of this collaboration is the expansion of eTrace, a computerized system that facilitates the tracing of guns that were manufactured in or legally imported into the U.S. The statistics regarding the origin of confiscated firearms in Mexico may not be entirely accurate. The figures reported only represent firearms that Mexican authorities asked the U.S. to trace and the ATF was able to trace. Guns without U.S. maker or importer marks, as required by U.S. law, were not submitted for tracing. Less than 12% of the total arms seized in Mexico in 2008 were positively traced to the U.S., which means that almost 90% of the guns seized in Mexico in 2008 were not traced back to the United States. The tracing system was not designed to collect statistics, according to the Congressional Research Service. However, in 2008, William Hoover testified before Congress that over 90% of the firearms that were recovered or interdicted in transport to Mexico originated from various sources within the U.S. The ATF later admitted that the 90% figure could be misleading because it applied only to the small portion of Mexican crime guns that were traced. A review by the U.S. Office of the Inspector General in September 2010 revealed that the ATF could not provide updated information on the percentage of traced Mexican crime guns that were sourced to the U.S. Despite these challenges, ATF maintains that a significant percentage of firearms used by cartels originate from gun stores and other sources in the U.S. Firearms traffickers often use the same routes as drug traffickers, and increasingly, cartels are transporting firearms and munitions from Guatemala, situated on Mexico's southern border. The collaboration between the U.S. and Mexico continues to be a vital effort in the fight against organized crime and drug cartels. The issue of gun trafficking and illegal sales has been a growing concern, particularly in Mexico. Despite an increase in trace requests, the majority of guns seized in Mexico are not traced, and the rate of successful traces has declined over time. This is due to several factors, including limited access to guns seized by the Mexican Army, insufficient communication between U.S. and Mexican law enforcement, and inadequate training. The result is a poor quality of tracing data, hindering the successful implementation of ATF's Gunrunner strategy. To add to the complexity, some analysts claim that the sample submitted for tracing is preselected to represent guns suspected of being of U.S. origin. This has resulted in a skewed pool of weapons being submitted for tracing, leading gun rights groups to question whether the majority of illegal guns in Mexico come from the United States. On the other hand, gun control advocates point to the successful U.S. origin trace rate and call for reenactment of the sunsetted federal assault weapons ban of 1994 till 2004. However, the real issue lies with legal sales by U.S. gun companies to the Mexican military and police. Despite being approved by the U.S. State Department, these weapons end up in cartel hands, with nearly 9,000 police weapons reported missing by the Mexican military. A 2009 audit showed that 26% of guns sold legally to governments in Mexico and Central America were diverted to the wrong hands. In the face of these challenges, it is clear that a comprehensive approach is needed to combat gun trafficking and illegal sales. This includes better communication and coordination between U.S. and Mexican law enforcement, more effective training, and stricter regulation of legal sales. Only then can we hope to stem the flow of weapons into the hands of criminals and cartels and bring about a safer, more secure future for all. Sources of weapon. The flow of illegal weapons into Mexico is a complex issue with sources from around the world. AK rifles, both semi-automatic and select fire, have been traced back to various regions including Central and South America, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Meanwhile, the United States is the primary source for AK variants and the R-15 rifle, which are often obtained through straw purchasers. Other weapons such as fragmentation grenades, RPG-7 launchers, and Barrett M82 rifles have been traced back to a mix of countries including the United States, Spain, and North Korea. According to research, out of the 4,000 successfully traceable firearms seized in Mexico from 2004 to 2008, the majority were of U.S. origin, and the ATF has pointed to straw purchasing as a significant contributor. These illegal weapons often end up in the hands of dangerous cartels, making the need for effective international cooperation in combating arms trafficking more pressing than ever. Project Gunrunner. Project Gunrunner was launched by the ATF with the noble aim of stopping the illegal sale and transportation of firearms from the United States into Mexico. The Mexican drug cartels heavily rely on these guns as their tools of trade, and the ATF's objective was to cut off this supply. However, what followed under the umbrella of Project Gunrunner was nothing short of a debacle. The infamous Operation Gunwalker included Fast and Furious, Too Hot to Handle, Wide Receiver, and White Gun, all of which permitted and facilitated the straw purchase of firearms by traffickers and allowed the guns to walk across the border into Mexico. The controversy that followed this operation cannot be overstated. ATF agents were instructed not to notify Mexican authorities, which resulted in some agents and supervisors strongly objecting to the operation. Gun dealers who were cooperating with the ATF also protested the sales but were asked to complete the transactions to gather intelligence. Gun Owners of America accused the ATF of attempting to inflate the statistics of seized firearms with American commercial provenance from Mexican crime scenes. In 2011, weapons linked to this operation were recovered in 4 police seizures of drugs and guns in the Phoenix area. The tragic death of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in 2010, who was killed in a shootout with drug cartel members, further exposed the flaws of this operation. 2 rifles from Fast and Furious were found at the scene of the crime, although there is no concrete evidence proving that Terry was killed with either of those guns. A total of 372 Fast and Furious firearms were recovered in the United States, and 195 were recovered in Mexico. The operation, which was intended to stop the flow of illegal guns, ended up doing the exact opposite, with disastrous consequences. Trends in U.S. firearms trafficking. The issue of gun violence in Mexico is complex and multifaceted, and one source of firearms for Mexican cartels has been a topic of controversy for years. Although licensed gun dealers in the U.S. are often blamed for this problem, the ATF has suggested that other sources such as gun shows, theft, and private sales may play a greater role in the trafficking of guns to Mexico. Gun smugglers have been known to use coercion or bribes to convince U.S. residents to purchase firearms from gun shops or shows and then transfer them to cartel representatives, a process known as a straw purchase. Despite efforts by the ATF to trace guns used in crimes back to their original purchaser, there is currently no national gun registry in the U.S. Instead, agents must rely on the firearms tracing system, which is partially automated and relies on registration records with individual names and addresses. This process can be time-consuming and often does not result in identifying the person who last possessed the gun before it was used in a crime. In addition to these challenges, there have been cases of guns being smuggled into the U.S. from Europe and other countries despite a U.S. ban on certain types of firearms. For example, more than 500 Kalashnikov rifles were smuggled into Mexico from the U.S. by Century Arms International, a clear violation of U.S. law. These types of firearms, along with other AK-47s and Chinese Norinco Type 56s, have been seized in large quantities by Mexican authorities in recent years, despite not being legally imported into the U.S. since the 1990s. Legislation. The issue of gun trafficking between the United States and Mexico is a complex and multifaceted problem that has long vexed law enforcement officials on both sides of the border. Even though there are over 78,000 licensed gun dealers in the U.S., many of the guns being used by Mexican drug cartels are obtained through illegal means, such as straw purchases, theft, and private sales. To combat this problem, the House Foreign Affairs Committee has approved a bill that would allocate $73.5 million to increase ATF resources dedicated to disrupting the flow of illegal guns into Mexico. Additionally, U.S. President Barack Obama has proposed ratifying an inter-American treaty known as CIFTA, which would establish a process for information sharing among different countries' law enforcement divisions to stop the smuggling of arms. However, not everyone is convinced that more funding or treaties are the solution. Some experts argue that enforcing existing gun control laws, such as the Gun Control Act of 1968, could be a more effective means of limiting foreign weapon sales to straw purchasers. Regardless of the approach taken, addressing the problem of gun trafficking between the U.S. and Mexico will require a multifaceted and collaborative effort. Thank you for watching another amazing video from our true crime team. Like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned to our next real-life true crime video.